in death we hope to be remembered, and that what we did on earth made some kind of impact, if nothing else for our closest and loved ones. When we die forgotten and without impact, it is as if we had never existed. That is the fate for millions of people who died silently, unknown, and forgotten in World War II. But for most of them, albeit anonymously, their death is remembered as an event. The individual battles, the Holocaust, the Blitz, fighting the resistance, the bombing of Germany and Japan, the Bengal famine, the invasions and liberations, the Japanese slave labor camps, the atrocities of the Nazis in occupied territory, Hiroshima, Nagasaki, and so on. And then there are the rare cases when even the event, even with massive death toll, has been forgotten, like how under a United Nations alliance occupation, millions of peaceful individuals may have died in one series of events in one country, and 80 years later, almost no one remembers and nobody seems to care. This is the forgotten famine of World War II, the Iranian famine. Before we start today's program, here's a word from the Time Ghost Army. Never forget. Never give up. Never surrender. Join the Time Ghost Army. This is a World War II in real-time special episode on the Iranian famine. I'm Spartacus Olson. In the last third of the 19th century and the first half of the 20th, one human lifetime, Iran suffered 3 catastrophic famines. The first killed anywhere between 4 to 12 million Iranians from 1870 to 1872, the second between 2 and 10 million during the Great War. The third, killing up to 4 million during World War II, which of the 3 is the most forgotten and scarcely referred to in most Western scholarship. Now, I have studied the tragedies of this war for 4 decades in excruciating detail, and I didn't even know about this, nor did any of the other historians on our team. It was members of our community who brought this overlooked part of history to our attention. Thank you for pointing us in this direction. It is in great part that interactive aspect of our kind of historiography that we love and cherish. We don't just report on history like a book does, we discover it as the historiography is forged in interaction with all of you. Again, thank you for this privilege. And with that, on to the actual history. Shah of Iran, Reza Shah Pahlavi, declares his country neutral upon the outbreak of World War II. His sympathies do lean towards Germany, which is Iran's top trading partner and heavily involved in developing its infrastructure. To boot, Germany has little history of interference in Iran, something which can't be said of Britain or Russia and its successor state, the USSR. Still, he recognizes that no side has Iranian interests in mind and stays nominally neutral. This remains the status quo until June 22, 1941, when German Führer Adolf Hitler launches Operation Barbarossa, invading the Soviet Union. The British and the Soviets become allies, and together grow worried that Germany may be developing a fifth column in Iran to enable an invasion or coup. German-aligned Iran would directly threaten India, British imperial possessions in the Middle East, and British oil production in the region. And Iran is right on the Soviets' doorstep, dangerously close to its own oil fields around Baku. Perhaps most importantly, Iran provides one of the most secure routes for delivering Anglo-American supplies to the USSR. So, despite Iran's neutrality, the Soviets and Brits launched a joint invasion on August 25th to split her into respective zones of operation. Iranian resistance crumbles within days, and Reza Shah quickly declares a ceasefire. Iran has suffered 800 military and 200 civilian deaths. The British and Soviets lose about 80 men between them. What follows is several chaotic weeks where the invading forces settle in. The Shah procrastinates on a settlement, and the country falls into disarray. By September 16, it's clear that Allied forces are tired of waiting and move to occupy the Iranian capital of Tehran. The Shah abdicates in response. He is replaced by his son, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, still only 21 and apparently an insecure and reluctant new monarch. Iran is now divided into 3 zones: a Soviet zone in the north, a British zone in the south, and a nominally independent Iranian zone in the center. Already, there are anxieties about the food situation. In the chaos brought by the invasion, many farmers stopped working the fields. To get them to return, the government raises its offered price for wheat by 100% and increases imports from India to compensate for the shortfall. The Allies legitimized their presence by negotiating an alliance with Iran. The Tripartite Treaty of Alliance signed on January 29, 1942. Article 7 reads, "The Allied powers jointly undertake to use their best endeavors to safeguard the economic existence of the Iranian people against the privations and difficulties arising as a result of the present war." This food issue lands in Allied responsibility because they now control all means to transport anything through and in the country, including food. Article 3 obliges the Shah to secure to the Allied powers for the passage of troops and supplies from one Allied power to the other or for other similar purposes the unrestricted right to use, maintain, guard, and, in case of military necessity, control in any way that they may require all means of communication throughout Iran, including railways, roads, rivers, aerodromes, ports, pipelines, and telephone, telegraph, and wireless installations, to furnish all possible assistance and facilitate in obtaining material and recruiting labor for the purpose of the maintenance and improvement of the means of communication referred to. So, the Allies set about developing the Persian corridor to supply the Eastern Front. By now, the Soviet Union is an official recipient of Lend-Lease, and America has entered the war. The British initially run things, but by September, control of the Trans-Iranian Railway goes to the Americans. The first U.S. troops enter Iran already in December. Both Britain and America will run truck convoys through the corridor. The Persian corridor soon develops into a critical lifeline for the Soviet Union. Iran's railways and roads are clogged with traffic carrying supplies for the Soviet war effort. Ports are full of unloading ships, and thousands of aircraft fly across the skies. One travel writer will describe how the military stream of help to Russia that panted up from Karachi day and night, a river of metal flowed north across the wastes of the Persian borderland. Throughout the war, the U.S. will deliver about 17.5 million tons of Lend-Lease aid to the Soviets. 5 to 8 million tons of that will pass through the corridor. All sides are aware of the impact this is having. Already in April 1942, the Grand Admiral of the Kriegsmarine, Erich Raeder, reports to the Führer that all British or American war material which reaches Russia by way of the Near East and the Caucasus is extremely disadvantageous to our land offensive. Every ton of supplies which the enemy manages to get through to the Near East means a continuous reinforcement of the enemy war potential, makes our own operations in the Caucasus more difficult, and strengthens the British positions in the Near East and Egypt. But this bridge to victory comes at a cost. The Allies have commandeered the entire Iranian rail network and contracted half of Iran's private and public trucks. The remaining trucks have fast become unusable as occupying authorities restrict the import of spare parts. In total, Iran has lost 75% of its food distribution capacity. The damage is compacted by the massive infrastructure projects that, while creating tens of thousands of local jobs, takes laborers out of the fields just when food is in greater demand. Then, there are 100,000 hungry Allied soldiers garrisoned in the country and tens of thousands of Polish refugees in the country. Originally deported by the Soviets in 1939 to labor camps in the USSR, Stalin has now sent them to Iran in a bid to improve relations with the other Allies. Out of the already decreasing harvest, the authorities in the Soviet zone have seized wheat and even diverted grain imports from Azerbaijan to the Red Army. The growing economy and scarcity of product creates inflation, made worse by the Iranian government matching Allied needs for local currency by simply printing more of it. Average food prices in Tehran rise 555% from 1939 to 1943. The spiral is worsened by hoarding, both by those looking to exploit the situation and those fearing the worst, as it looks that is still to come. On February 24, 1942, the representative of an Iranian economic mission to the U.S., Alayar Saleh, warns the U.S. Department of State the famine may be on the horizon. Iranian diplomats like Saleh begin pleading their American and British counterparts to do something to alleviate the growing crisis. The Americans and the British, however, believe responsibility lies with the Iranian government. To them, supply isn't the issue, but shoddy distribution policies by the Iranian government and unchecked hoarding. It is probably a combination of all of the above, but let's not forget that Britain and the USSR have promised to safeguard the economic existence of the Iranian people. In April 1942, the Iranian government reports that it needs 160,000 tons of wheat to make it until the harvest of August 1943. The British set Iranian needs to 30,000 tons, coming in at shipments of 6,000 per month. Consul General in Iran, Claremont Scrine, will later sum up the reasoning. Which carry was the more urgent, gunny bags and shellac for the Kremlin, or wheat for the road laborers and the bread queues at Sahedan and Kash? By the second quarter of 1942, famine conditions are rapidly developing in parts of the country, especially in the more arid British-occupied south reliant on food supplies from the north. The capital is also suffering, as one civilian writes to a relative in July 1942. Living in Tehran is becoming impossible with the prices of everything soaring sky high. The barest necessities of life cost a fortune, and prices are 3 to 4 times higher than they were a few months ago. Bread is difficult to obtain, and unless you go at a certain time, you get no bread at all. Tensions rise, with rioting increasingly common across the country. The food crisis brings down the government in August 1942. When American reporters ask new Prime Minister Ahmad Khan what his program for the country is, he holds up a loaf of bread. "This is my program. If I can put bread of good quality in hands of all Iranians, other problems will be easy to solve." But the core problem persists, and with malnutrition comes apathy, squalor, and disease. Numerous reports from various allied agencies now note the increasingly desperate conditions. In one report, an American advisor to the Iranian gendarmerie observes how he witnessed a general atmosphere of underfeeding throughout his southward journey from Tehran, but notes things are particularly bad in the Arab-populated southern areas. The people are dirty, half-starved, ragged, lazy, and diseased. Many blind people and more evidence of trachoma, infantile paralysis, club feet, and Solak were seen than in any other part of the country visited so far. Solak appears to be some type of boil caused by a fly bite. Things do seem to be somewhat better in the more arable Soviet zone, but that comes at the cost of not alleviating things in the British and Iranian zones by regional exports. American officials are now growing increasingly sympathetic and lean on the British to agree to a food declaration of some kind. But the British won't budge until control of Iranian currency is taken out of the hands of the Iranian parliament, the Majlis, and handed to an independent Iranian commission. This will apparently be much more efficient in supplying the Allies with local cash and remove it as a bargaining chip for the Majlis in their dealing with the Allies. The Majlis finally consents to empowering a currency commission in November 1942. The victorious British quickly agree to a food declaration. On December 4th, the American, British, and Iranian governments signed the Tripartite Food Declaration. It asserts that food distribution is Iran's prime responsibility, but that the British and Americans will guarantee a sufficient bread supply until the 1943 harvest. The Iranians must also implement recommendations from an American advisor to the Minister of Food and the Road Transport. They also agree to import 25,000 tons of wheat, but the British stall on officially announcing this to extract further political concessions. Separately, the Soviets have agreed to release 7,500 tons of Azerbaijani wheat to Tehran. It takes a while to arrive, though, and the plight of many Iranians goes unrelieved. By early December 1942, the riots from the countryside have spread to the capital. On the 8th, thousands of demonstrators gather outside the Mailis with chants of, "You may kill us, but we must have bread." The initial crowds are mainly students and mothers, but soon other groups also start showing up to voice their anger. There is some evidence that the Shah and his allies instigate the protests to launch a coup and establish a military government. Conspiracy or not, the police do little to stop the rioters as they run the streets of Tehran, smashing windows and looting stores. One group storms the Mailis and another raids the house of Prime Minister Kovan. The police and army arrive in greater force in the evening, and as darkness sets in, the mobs disperse. But they return the next day, and the police and army react forcefully. Reports emerge of machine guns used against the crowds. A widely quoted casualty figure for the riot is at least 20 killed and 700 wounded. British and Soviet troops enter the city to permanently occupy Tehran and keep order. With the riots and new political intrigue continuing, the Kovan government soon falls, while British officials continue stalling in delivering sufficient wheat. So the sad story of hunger continues in the first months of the year. In March 1943, a British naval attaché reports, "Tehran is still on the verge of starvation and the daily death rate has trebled. A complete breakdown of bread supply has been averted by good luck, then by management, and the bread issue is almost uneatable." It's the Soviets who are coming to the rescue. Not wanting to lose their influence in the region to the Western Allies, in mid-April, they announce they will start shipping wheat to Tehran. The trade-off is again more concessions from Iran in other areas of the economy and imports from the USSR. By May, Anglo-American supplied wheat is also arriving at the quantity and frequency promised. There is now enough wheat to last until the harvest of 1943. And when yields from that harvest are high, the Allies agree to use some of their trucks to help with distribution. Yet, the suffering is not over. A typhus epidemic is now in full swing. The magnitude is hard to judge, but Tehran appears to be the hardest hit. An OSS reports in May 1943 states that the daily death rate in the city has risen to 80. And even though the food stores have begun to fill, widespread, tangible improvements are yet to be seen. Death from starvation is still widespread, especially in the south, as one British press attaché will observe in 1944. The older people were in many cases emaciated, and the children with swollen bellies, eye diseases were common, beggars were numerous, the people were dressed in rags, many of them almost naked. Hunger and disease will continue to intermittently blight Iran throughout the rest of the war, although the Allies will also be more proactive in alleviating the situation. It is difficult to estimate the total death toll. No one is keeping track. Fast-forwarding into the 21st century, Mohammad Gholi Maid will be one of the few scholars to attempt to document these events in depth. His conclusion is that 3 to 4 million Iranians succumbed to famine and disease during the Allied occupation. He comes to this by working out what the Iranian population should have been in 1944 according to the birth rates indicated by population reports and census on either side of the war years. According to Maid, the population in 1944 should have been 16 to 16.5 million. Instead, it was 12 million. There are some caveats here, though. For one, Maid's estimation of the death toll of the famine during the Great War is much higher than estimations by other scholars, and he has been criticized by several historians for exaggerating his figures, casting a shade also on his estimates for the Second World War famine. The lack of direct statistics also makes it problematic to link Iran's lower-than-expected population to a single cause. Even if the numbers are accurate, we don't know how many by famine or how many by disease. Furthermore, how much disease was tied to malnutrition? There might also be other factors at play. Birth rates still rose or plateaued in some countries during the war, but they fell in other places. The Soviet Union experienced a rapid fall in births in the first years of the war, and birth rates also fell in Japanese-occupied Singapore, Kuala Lumpur, and Jakarta. In Iran, the uncertainty of the war years and the threat of a broader famine may have affected birth rates, but this remains speculation. We know from documentary evidence that, at the very least, famine conditions existed in many regions. We also know that life across Iran was often unbearable and that the threat of famine was never far away. The record of which government most negatively contributed to the situation is debatable and hard to read out conclusively. But there is a bottom line here. Britain and the Soviet Union invaded a neutral and sovereign country and forced its political and economic reconstruction in pursuit of their own war aims. America then joined its allies in turning Iran into a highway through which to shuttle supplies. The dislocation this caused would be enough to throw any country's economy into disarray, even without the added pressure of tens of thousands of occupying mouths to feed. As we have seen, it took a long time for any of the allies to even partially live up to their responsibilities to Iran. By then, maybe perhaps millions of people were dying. This fact has gone largely unnoticed in the bulk of World War II historiography. It shows that the history of World War II is not dead. It is living and open to fresh investigation and analysis. It is the year 2022. And we are still learning just how much this massive conflict shaped and destroyed lives in every corner of the globe. Never forget.